Then as they fly into Wakanda, we learn how the Wakandan barrier is monitored. This is amazing. I can't believe they did this.
And here's where it starts to, as with last time, with having these gigantic sky rises that have mud huts built into the side of them for no reason.
They're still there, by the way.
They are still there. They've not addressed any of those complaints that many people had because large amounts of the African-American audience, apparently, because they're not African, just looked at went, looks close enough to Africa for me.
Yeah, but they don't know that because as we remember with Winston Duke, who plays M'Baku, our favourite character, by the way, which we'll get onto later, he actually said...
He's so wasted in these films.
Yeah, he actually said there's an inevitability about this film because ever since we were thrown off the slave ships, this movie was coming.
What's really powerful about this movie is that there's that sense of inevitability that the second they put us on those slave ships, this movie was coming.
And it's like, right, okay, so
as if I didn't have enough reason to be against slavery. It ended up producing this film
Panther.
As well.
We were vindicated in saying on that very successful YouTube clip, Wakanda is an African. It's an African-American misconception of authentic African life. They're nothing like the actual Maasai tribe, for example. It's just a weird mishmash hodgepodge of what they think is African culture.
Interestingly enough, I forget what her actual name is. The woman who's in this, who also plays Michonne in The Walking Dead. She's one of the bald warrior women.
Danielle. She's a Koya, yes.
Yeah. She's from Zimbabwe.
Right.
I think. There are people from Africa who star in this film. So they should know.
Yeah.
Reasonably speaking, they should look at this and go, are you making fun of us? Is this a joke? Because like you were saying, as we were building up to, the way that they open the barrier is they have tiny little drums submerged in a tiny little shallow bit of water that they just go on. And the barrier opens.
It's more efficient to open the Black Gate of Mordor.
The most technologically advanced civilization in the entire world.
Uses drums.
That has reinvented Tony Stark's, 3D, I'm just going to move my hands and things will happen technology.
Well, they
forgot to
invented
install
it before
a
him.
button. They forgot to just put a button.
It's a lever.
God, I hate this
This movie
film.
sucks so bad. All right, so then they go and Shuri has a conversation with her mother, of course, after they've recently memorialized King T'Challa.
Oh, that was one of the things that we forgot to mention, is that immediately after he dies, we get to see the funeral, and
it's the Ghanaian
it's the
dead meme.
It's the dancing. It's the dancing guys with the coffin on the shoulders. And they're all dancing, and there's a George Floyd-esque memorial painting of T'Challa on one of the walls. Interestingly enough, in one of the interviews I was watching, one of the women interviewers, when she was speaking to most of the cast, mentioned about how T'Challa, along with later on in the film, his mother dies, the Queen Ramonda, that's her name. She dies as well.
Rayquaza.
The women are the pallbearers, the warrior women, and this interviewer was so excited. She went, "Oh my God, it's so great to see women put into a role that's typically assigned strength. I've never seen a woman be a pallbearer before." Ryan Coogler, director of the film, was there any reason for that? What was the significance of that for you? And he just pauses for a second with a really dumb look on his face because he obviously hadn't thought about it. And he's just like, "Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah,
Is he Italian?
yeah, they're close enough. It's American. They all sound the same to me." And he basically just goes, "Well, they were strong characters. I thought, literally physically strong, so I thought they might as well be carrying all of these extra meanings that people outside of the film are dropping into it. That obviously the filmmakers actually had no clue about, because they were just thinking need people to pick up heavy box, get strong women to pick up heavy box."
Well, also the box itself, both times, you could tell there was nothing in it. They might as well have been lifting a bit of foam because it just went up like that. There was no struggling.
They were holding it with tense bicep, bent elbow, whereas I've actually been a pallbearer before, and you have to hold it on the shoulder because coffins with a dead body in it are very heavy.
Well, look at the Queen's funeral, for example. There's a great standpoint to contrast between these two deaths of the monarchs and that one.
Yeah, that's a great point.
The fellas who were carrying that, the men in full-on military gear, first of all, they were in their ceremonial garb. The Dora Milaje were just wearing white robes. I understand it's a cultural touchstone, but you would actually have some sort of military uniform if they're the King's Guard carrying it. They would be distinguished from
I thought the Dora
commoners.
Milaje were just wearing their red warrior women outfits that they always wear.
Not in the funeral scene, I don't think they were. I
Perhaps-
thought they were wearing white.
Perhaps I'm misremembering.
And then they're just carrying it like that, whereas the lads who were, actually fighting age men, young boys,
Big guys, I expect.
they were struggling and straining. You could see their faces clench as they were walking down the steps to put it on the back of the carriage. And there was always a sense of gravitas and concern that they would, not that they would drop it, but they're like, I cannot screw this up. This is such an important moment in my life. The Dora Milaje picks it up like it was a lump of wood. Like, it was just completely casual.
Well, not even like it was a lump of wood, like it was a lump of cheap plastic.
Yeah, and
Which the set design did not make me think it wasn't.
no. And I will say, though, for the funeral scene as well, when you said there should be respect to Chadwick Boseman's passing, despite his egregious politics and saying he agreed more with the genocidal murderer villain of the first one than his own character.
Yep.
Neither here nor there. Shuri, who's the actress that played her?
Letitia Wright.
Letitia Wright. I will credit her performance during the funeral was actually very compelling. She did break down and cry, and that was pretty bad. I think, weirdly enough, behind the scenes, she seems all right. She seems like the least egregious racial politician because she's speaking mainly about her connections to Chadwick, and we have heard that she could be possibly a COVID misinformation spreader, and the rest of the cast refused to comment on her vaccine status.
Yes, I've seen a few of these interviews with Letitia Wright. I think she goes to like Bible study groups. She seems very Christian.
Yeah.
She seems like she's from Guyana.
No, she was born in Kenya, raised in Mexico, but she is English.
No, that's Lupita Nyong'o.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, I've been
Oh,
looking
okay.
into all this today. So Letitia Wright was born in Guyana. When she was 7, she moved to London with her parents and
I
was
got that mixed
raised
up then.
was raised there, and she got into acting in England. In fact, she starred in like Doctor Who episodes and stuff.
Yeah, I
the
remember
past.
that one with Peter Capaldi. That was really bad.
A lot of the Capaldi ones
She
were.
was in Black
sadly.
Mirror as well.
Oh, was she? That doesn't. Oh, yes,
Museum
of course. She was
episode.
in Black Museum. That's a decent episode. To be,
It's okay.
It's an okay one. But yeah, so she seems like an all right person. She's a good actor. The problem is that later on in the film, they try and turn her into a morally grey, conflicted character.
Well, they start at the start, so they capitalise on her disrespect that we pointed out in the first movie by making it a point of contention as to whether or not she's right to be disrespectful and buck trends. Because when her mother takes her into the African brush to do a ceremony to commune with her brother's spirit on the anniversary of his death, Shuri says that you're not talking to my brother's spirit, it's just the construct. That's incredibly postmodern dismissal of how your mother is coping with it.
That is one of the... It's really difficult to say that there are many character arcs in this film because the way it's structured, being almost 3 hours long, it really does just feel like a bunch of disconnected scenes.
Yes.
A lot of the time, there's very little momentum that's spread throughout the film. It often feels like there's dangling plot threads that just kind of get thrown aside, and then if we remember later, we'll just pick them back up. Like, once again, Everett Ross is in this film, and it really just feels like an afterthought. He's in 4 scenes or something like that, and they're basically just there to show how incompetent the man is. But there's kind of a running theme about her own personal battle with tradition versus her own ideas, given that she's such a young scientist. She's obviously not got experience or wisdom behind her. And later on at the end of the film, in memory of her mother, she gets a white robe right at the end of the film, and she's sitting on a beach with a fire in front of her, and she chooses to burn the white robe, which is a traditional ceremony that they have in Wakanda as part of memorial and part of the grieving process, which she shares a scene with her mother earlier in the film when they're both mourning T'Challa, where her mother does that, and she's there like, oh, why are you doing that stupid tradition? So there is kind of a through line of her embracing just a little bit more of the traditions, which is kind of nice. If I'm going to say anything positive about the film, there was an attempt at something right there, and that comes into it later because Killmonger shows back up in this film. And because we know how iconic a villain he was and how everybody loved Killmonger, so we needed to get some of that sweet, sweet Eric Killmonger charisma back on screen. But that's something that's also put in there with the idea of, are you going to be soft like your mother, or are you going to get stuff done like me?
Are you going to kill the children of the quote-unquote white colonizers?
But in context, it's not even that. The context is, are you going to defend your own people against an invading thing, against an invading force? So in that case, yes, you should get
Yes.
stuff done. You shouldn't leave these people alive who are openly aggressing against you, at least not their leader, who is the one who's saying, I will burn down your entire civilization if you don't team up with me to kill Whitey.
Yeah, it actually doesn't make sense to have Killmonger show up at all if you're going with that narrative, because they're trying to conflate the idea of Killmonger just wanted vengeance, guys, rather than directly wanting white genocide, whereas Shuri is saying, I want to avenge my mother from the guy that actually drowned her. It's not like I want to do a race war, I just want to get this guy.
And
put him
then
down.
later on, it's the ghost of her, well, the spirit of her own mother who shows up when she's about to kill the guy who killed her mother in the first place. And she goes, show them who you really are. At which point she decides to let the guy live. And it makes no sense because it's like, I'm sorry, Mum, this guy killed you and was about to destroy our entire civilization. So, no, I can disagree with you on this one.
Yeah, well, you keep saying the guy. It's Namor, obviously, and he shows up around that point in the chronological narrative
Yes,
we're discussing.
when they're grieving T'Challa
Yeah.
and burning the ceremonial robes.
When he shows up with an actual bone through his nose, which is hilarious, he makes a point about Wakanda joining the UN and exposing vibranium to the rest of the world, which is entirely valid, actually.
Yes. Well, that's the thing. There's a scene right before that where you get the UN and some members of the CIA, two members of the CIA who are kind of like the POV characters for the scene. They're in the middle of the ocean. They're looking for vibranium because all of a sudden they've only just figured out that vibranium exists. They've got some people down there. The people underwater at the bottom of the ocean vanish. They get killed off. And then a load of the Nemorians show up. They sing a hypnotizing song, which they only use twice in the whole film, which would be really useful if they used more often, to be honest. But they hypnotize all of the members on the ship to jump off, and then Namor shows up as a helicopter's flying off and destroys the helicopter. So
he doesn't show up actually yet. It's his
he does,
goons. It's two
no,
goons.
because he's the one who takes out the
Oh,
helicopter.
yes, you're
'cause
right,
He's
he's
flying
hovering,
above
yes.
the air, which the other ones aren't able to do.
Yep.
But they're trying to protect the vibranium because alongside Wakanda, for some reason, there's also, despite the fact that the whole point was I thought there was vibranium meteorite flew down, landed where Wakanda ended up being, and the people, the tribes around there, that's what allowed them. Apparently, there must have been other meteors.
Well,
that
that's
just
what they
fell to
say.
Earth.
They said, oh, the majority of the world is covered with water, so there must have been a bit that splinters off and landed in the sea, which actually is not an unfair thing to say in terms of the world building. That's fine. The question that arises, though, is if they've had vibranium for this long,
At least 70, 80 years.
Well, way longer than that, because they've been around under the... No, they've had it for way longer, because they found the flowers a few hundred years ago in the 1600s.
I meant the people on the surface with Howard Stark. You know, if they've had that for that long and they know it's such a valuable resource, they should have been looking for it for way longer.
Yes, but the Talokans, okay, if they've had vibranium for that long, one, were they not affected by the Thanos snap? So why didn't they come to the surface looking for answers?
Yeah, I brought this up.
Exactly.
Did
Two,
Namor die? Did Namor get zapped? Who knows?
when Namor takes Shuri to Taloka, it's an underwater market with fruit and rope, and they don't have any vehicles. They all just swim lazily with no clothing on. They basically turn vibranium into jewelry, and that's it.
It looks horribly dilapidated at parts as well. It's just covered in moss underwater, and I understand that moss would build up underwater, but take care of yourselves. It's almost like to introduce Shuri to this civilization, kind of racist Namor. It looks like you took her to the ghetto first.
It looks like they envisioned it as a sunken Mayan city, but didn't realize that it wasn't built before they got there because the water people were only a couple of hundred years old.
From watching the interviews, the impression that I get is that they wanted to change the original origin from the comics of it being Atlantis and make it more specific to the Mexican, Mayan, Aztecs culture originally that would have been in that area near where it is. So instead of making it look like Atlantis, they wanted to make it look more like a modern...
Well, not modern.
Well,
they wanted to make it look like an Aztec ruin because that's all they've seen. But instead, why didn't they do... And they did a really poor job, always have done, of incorporating technology with Wakanda, but at least they've put technology and made it Afrofuturist. Instead, they've just said, yeah, the apex of Native American civilization is when you were sacrificing children's hearts to the snake god, and you've never moved on since. It's pretty messed up.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.